There's something peculiar about the way we move through our days. Isn't there? We wake up, shuffle to the bathroom, go about our routines, and rarely pause to consider whether these simple acts might be quietly writing our health story. I've spent years listening to patients share their experiences, and what strikes me most isn't the dramatic moments, but rather the ordinary ones that changed everything. Let me tell you about Margaret. She was 73 when I first met her, a vibrant woman who loved her evening rituals. Every night around 11, she'd run a hot bath, steam filling the small bathroom as she prepared for bed. It felt luxurious, she told me, like a reward after a long day. But one winter evening, as temperatures outside dropped and the house grew cold, Margaret stepped out of her bath and felt the world tilt. Her daughter found her on the bathroom floor minutes later, confused and unable to move her right arm properly. What Margaret didn't know was that her nightly ritual had been gradually increasing her stroke risk with each passing season. The relationship between our bathing habits and brain health is more intricate than most people realize. Recent research has shown that when ambient temperature drops by just 5 degrees Celsius, hospital admissions for stroke increase by over 7%. Our bodies are remarkably adaptive machines. But as we age, the machinery becomes less flexible. The blood vessels that once expanded and contracted smoothly now respond more sluggishly to temperature changes. When Margaret bathed late at night in a cold bathroom, her body faced a perfect storm, naturally declining core temperature from the circadian rhythm, cold environmental conditions, and the sudden vasodilation from hot water followed by rapid cooling when she stepped out. The science behind this is fascinating yet sobering. Our arterial walls contain smooth muscle that responds to temperature signals. In younger years, these muscles can quickly adjust, maintaining steady blood flow to the brain regardless of external conditions. But after 60, arterial walls stiffen due to a process called arteriosclerosis. Think of it like an old rubber band that's lost its stretch. When exposed to sudden temperature shifts, these rigid vessels can't accommodate changes smoothly. They either clamp down too forcefully, spiking blood pressure, or fail to constrict adequately, causing precipitous drops in circulation. Both scenarios create conditions ripe for clot formation or vessel rupture. What many don't realize is that the danger extends beyond just the timing of baths. Thomas, a retired engineer I worked with, prided himself on his morning cold showers. He'd read somewhere that cold exposure boosted immunity and mental clarity. So at age 68, he started his days with ice-cold water. For 3 weeks, he felt invigorated and told everyone about his new routine. Then one Tuesday morning, as he stepped from the shower, his legs gave way. The cold water had caused such severe vasoconstriction that a small clot, which had been quietly sitting in a partially blocked artery, suddenly lodged itself in a critical brain vessel. The stroke was relatively minor, but it ended his independence for months during recovery. Contemporary studies on bathing-related ischemic stroke have revealed something crucial. The cardiovascular strain imposed by bathing is not trivial. When we immerse ourselves in water, particularly hot water, our body initiates a complex cascade of responses. Heart rate adjusts, blood pressure fluctuates, and the autonomic nervous system works overtime to maintain equilibrium. For someone with compromised cardiovascular function or cerebral small vessel disease, these adjustments can overwhelm the system. Japanese research has documented that bathing-related deaths account for nearly 9% of all sudden deaths, with strokes comprising a significant portion of these fatalities. Yet, the temperature extremes aren't the only concern. Duration matters profoundly. Sandra loved long soaks in her garden tub, often spending 45 minutes or more submerged in very hot water. She'd emerge feeling relaxed, but noticed she sometimes felt lightheaded afterward. She attributed this to standing up too quickly. What Sandra didn't recognize was that prolonged heat exposure was causing her blood vessels to dilate extensively, reducing blood pressure to potentially dangerous levels. The brain requires consistent blood flow to function properly, and when that flow drops too low, even temporarily, the risk of clot formation increases substantially. The mechanism here involves something physiologists call hemodynamic instability, when blood vessels throughout the body dilate in response to heat. Blood pools in peripheral areas, particularly the extremities. This pooling means less blood returns to the heart, which then has less to pump to the brain. For a period, the body can compensate, but if the exposure continues too long, or if the person already has compromised circulation, this compensation fails. Recent clinical data published in multiple medical journals confirms that individuals over 65 face markedly higher risks when bathing in very hot water for extended periods, particularly those with existing hypertension or cardiovascular conditions. But here's something that surprised even me when I first learned it. Dehydration plays a more significant role than most people suspect. Robert was a meticulous man who followed his morning routine with precision. Up at 6, medications at 6:15. Shower at 6:30. What he never did was drink water before his shower. He simply never thought about it. One morning, after his usual routine, he felt dizzy while drying off. He sat down, thinking it would pass. But the dizziness intensified. His wife called for help, and at the hospital, doctors discovered his blood work showed significant hemoconcentration. His blood had literally become too thick, moving sluggishly through vessels that needed it to flow freely. Medical literature has established that even mild dehydration can increase blood viscosity substantially. Thicker blood flows more slowly and has a greater propensity to clot. When you add the sweating that occurs during a warm shower or bath, even though we don't always notice it happening, you compound the problem. Studies tracking fluid intake and stroke incidents have found clear correlations. Individuals who regularly consume less than 1.5 liters of water daily show notably higher markers for clot formation. The elderly face additional challenges here because thirst sensation diminishes with age. Many older adults simply don't feel thirsty, even when their bodies desperately need fluids. The timing of bathing relative to other activities also matters more than most realize. Patricia had always showered immediately after her morning gardening sessions. She'd work in the yard for an hour or so, building up a good sweat, then head straight inside for a hot shower. She felt this was the hygienic thing to do. But after a dizzy spell that sent her to urgent care, her doctor explained that this pattern was problematic. During exercise, blood vessels dilate to deliver oxygen to working muscles. The body also loses significant fluid through perspiration. Jumping immediately into a hot shower compounds the vasodilation while providing no opportunity for rehydration. The result can be a precipitous drop in blood pressure that leaves the brain starved for oxygen. Research examining post-exercise bathing patterns has documented this risk. The cardiovascular system needs time to recalibrate after physical exertion. Heart rate must return toward baseline. Fluid balance needs restoration. And blood vessel tone should normalize. Rushing this transition by immediately exposing the body to hot water interferes with these natural recovery processes. The data suggests waiting at least 20 to 30 minutes after moderate exercise before bathing, and using that time to rehydrate allows the body to stabilize safely. Similarly, bathing right after meals creates competing demands on the circulatory system. When we eat, blood flow naturally redirects toward the digestive organs to aid in breaking down food and absorbing nutrients. This is why people often feel sleepy after a large meal. The body is focusing resources on digestion. Adding a hot shower to this equation means the skin also demands increased blood flow due to vasodilation from heat. The brain, caught in the middle of these competing demands, may not receive adequate circulation. Henry, a retired accountant, learned this lesson when he collapsed in his bathroom 20 minutes after a heavy Sunday lunch. His blood pressure had dropped dangerously low, and he'd suffered what doctors called a transient ischemic attack, essentially a warning stroke. Now, you might be thinking, surely if I just pay attention to when and how I bathe, I'll be safe. That's largely true, but there's another dimension to consider. We don't just bathe, we also move through our days. And how we move matters enormously. Let me tell you about James and his evening walks. James took up walking after retiring, determined to stay active and healthy. His doctor had recommended regular exercise, and James embraced the advice wholeheartedly. Every evening at 9 o'clock, he'd set out for a brisk 45-minute walk around his neighborhood. He loved the quiet of the evening, the cool air, the sense of accomplishment before bed. But after several months of this routine, James noticed he was having trouble sleeping. His heart would race as he lay in bed, and he'd wake frequently during the night. When he mentioned this to his doctor, she explained that his evening walks, while well-intentioned, were actually disrupting his circadian rhythm and potentially increasing his stroke risk. The science of circadian rhythms reveals how profoundly our bodies are governed by internal clocks. As evening approaches and light fades, our bodies begin preparing for rest. The sympathetic nervous system, responsible for our fight or flight responses, should be winding down. Heart rate naturally decreases, blood pressure drops slightly, and various hormones shift to promote sleep. When we engage in vigorous exercise late in the evening, we essentially tell our body to do the opposite. The sympathetic system activates, heart rate climbs, and blood pressure rises precisely when it should be falling. Contemporary research on exercise timing and cardiovascular health has revealed some startling findings. Studies tracking nighttime blood pressure in individuals who exercise late in the evening show persistent elevation even hours after the activity ends. This matters because nighttime blood pressure is an independent risk factor for stroke. In fact, many strokes occur during sleep, and elevated blood pressure during these vulnerable hours significantly increases that risk. The data suggests that exercise, while universally beneficial, should ideally occur earlier in the day, allowing the body's natural evening wind down to proceed uninterrupted. But timing isn't the only concern with walking. The way we hold our bodies while walking influences how well blood reaches our brain. I remember Carol, a lovely woman in her 70s who came to see me complaining of frequent headaches and occasional dizziness during her daily walks. When I watched her walk, I immediately noticed her posture: head tilted forward, shoulders rounded, arms barely swinging. She looked like she was perpetually searching for something on the ground. This forward-bent posture, I explained, was likely contributing to her symptoms. The relationship between posture and cerebral blood flow is more direct than most people appreciate. Recent studies from Japan have demonstrated that forward-leaning posture significantly reduces blood flow to the brain compared to upright walking. The carotid arteries, which supply most of the blood to the brain, run through the neck. When we crane our heads forward or hunch our shoulders, we create subtle but meaningful compression on these vital vessels. Add to this the reduced chest expansion that comes with poor posture, limiting oxygen intake, and you have a recipe for chronic cerebral hypoperfusion, a fancy term meaning the brain isn't getting quite enough blood and oxygen. Research published in recent years has also linked bent posture to actual aberrations in carotid artery positioning. When the neck bends forward chronically, the distance the carotid artery must traverse between its origin and the skull base effectively shortens. But arteries, particularly atherosclerotic ones that have lost flexibility, cannot simply shorten on demand. Instead, they kink or bend abnormally, creating areas of disturbed blood flow where clots are more likely to form. Clinical studies have found that elderly individuals with forward head posture show significantly higher rates of posterior circulation strokes. Then there's the matter of when we walk relative to eating. Elizabeth, a vibrant 70-year-old, had read that walking after meals aids digestion and helps control blood sugar. So, immediately after each meal, before her food had even begun to digest properly, she'd head out for a walk. One afternoon, about 15 minutes into her post-lunch walk, she felt suddenly weak and disoriented. A neighbor found her sitting on a park bench, pale and confused. The emergency room doctors diagnosed a transient ischemic attack, likely precipitated by her walking pattern. The physiology here is straightforward but often overlooked. After eating, the gastrointestinal system demands increased blood flow to process food. This is a substantial metabolic undertaking, particularly after a large meal. When we start walking immediately, our leg muscles also demand increased blood supply. The body attempts to serve both masters, but in older adults with less cardiovascular reserve, this splitting of resources can leave the brain short-changed. Studies examining postprandial exercise have confirmed that waiting 45 minutes to an hour after eating before engaging in physical activity significantly reduces the risk of circulation-related problems. Weather conditions add another layer of complexity to safe walking. Arthur loved his morning constitutional, regardless of weather. Hot summer days, bitter winter mornings, he walked through them all, proud of his consistency. But his doctor grew concerned when Arthur mentioned feeling dizzy after his winter walks. When temperatures drop below 60 degrees Fahrenheit, our blood vessels constrict to preserve core body temperature. This vasoconstriction raises blood pressure, sometimes dramatically. For someone with already stiff arteries or existing hypertension, this cold-induced pressure spike can prove dangerous. Recent epidemiological data has confirmed what clinicians have long observed. Stroke rates rise notably during cold weather months. A comprehensive study tracking stroke admissions over multiple years found clear seasonal variations, with winter showing the highest incidence. Temperature fluctuations seem particularly problematic. Research from Taiwan published this year demonstrated that rapid day-to-day temperature changes significantly increase acute stroke risk, independent of other factors. The mechanism involves not just the cold itself, but the body's struggle to adapt to rapidly changing conditions. Heat presents its own hazards. When ambient temperature exceeds 95 degrees Fahrenheit, blood vessels dilate extensively to promote cooling through the skin. This can drop blood pressure significantly, especially in people taking certain medications like diuretics or blood pressure drugs. Dehydration compounds the problem, as people often underestimate how much fluid they lose through perspiration during hot weather activity. Medical literature documenting heat-related health impacts consistently identifies older adults as particularly vulnerable, with recommendations emphasizing hydration and limiting outdoor activity during extreme heat. The terrain we walk on also influences risk more than most people consider. Franklin preferred hiking trails to sidewalks, enjoying the challenge of hills and uneven ground. At 76, he remained active and capable, or so he thought. During a particularly steep uphill portion of his favorite trail, he felt his heart pounding and his breathing becoming labored. He pushed through, proud of his perseverance. But that evening, he experienced numbness in his arm and slurred speech that lasted several minutes. The neurologist later explained that the extreme exertion on steep terrain had caused his blood pressure to spike dangerously, likely dislodging a small plaque fragment that briefly blocked blood flow to his brain. Emerging research on exercise intensity and acute cardiovascular events has shed light on this phenomenon. While regular moderate exercise protects against stroke, sudden intense exertion, particularly in individuals not accustomed to it, can trigger acute events. Studies comparing walking on flat ground versus hilly terrain show markedly different cardiovascular responses. Systolic blood pressure can increase by 20 to 30 millimeters of mercury or more during uphill walking compared to level walking. For someone with vulnerable arterial plaques or compromised blood vessels, this surge in pressure can prove catastrophic. Perhaps most surprisingly, hydration status during and after walking influences stroke risk, extending into the nighttime hours. Dorothy walked faithfully every afternoon, but rarely drank water before, during, or after her walks. She simply didn't think about it. Over time, this chronic, mild dehydration made her blood more viscous. Recent research has established that inadequate fluid intake increases various clotting markers in the blood. The danger becomes most acute during sleep when the body's metabolic rate naturally slows, blood flow decreases, and thick, slow-moving blood is most likely to form dangerous clots. Neurology studies examining stroke timing have consistently found that many strokes occur in the early morning hours. Between 2 and 6 a.m., multiple factors contribute to this pattern, including natural blood pressure dips during deep sleep and changes in blood clotting factors. But hydration status plays a significant role. Individuals who are chronically underhydrated show significantly higher rates of early morning strokes. The recommendation emerging from this research is clear: regular hydration throughout the day, with particular attention before and after physical activity, helps maintain blood viscosity within safe ranges. Now, as important as how we bathe and walk may be, there's a third dimension of daily life that profoundly influences stroke risk: how we sit. Let me introduce you to William. William was a retired banker who spent his days, much as many retirees do, reading the newspaper over breakfast, watching television for several hours, working on crossword puzzles, reading books, more television in the evening. He was comfortable, content, and completely unaware that his sitting habits were quietly undermining his health. When he developed sudden weakness on one side of his body, the emergency room physicians told him he'd had a stroke. William was baffled. He didn't smoke. His blood pressure was controlled with medication, and he ate reasonably well. How could this happen? The answer lay in something he'd never considered: prolonged immobility. Recent comprehensive research has established sitting as an independent risk factor for cardiovascular disease, including stroke. A landmark study published this year examined over 7,000 adults who wore activity monitors for a week. The findings were striking. People who sat for 13 or more hours daily were 44% more likely to experience a stroke compared to those sitting less than 11 hours daily. Even more revealing, the length of sitting bouts mattered. Sitting continuously for more than 17 minutes at a stretch carried higher risk than shorter sitting periods. The physiological explanation involves venous stasis, a fancy term for sluggish blood flow. When we sit motionless, particularly with our knees bent at 90 degrees, blood flow in the legs slows significantly. The muscles that normally help pump blood back to the heart through the veins aren't engaging. Blood begins to pool, increasing the likelihood of clot formation. These clots, called deep vein thromboses, can break loose and travel through the circulatory system. If they reach the brain, they can cause stroke. If they reach the lungs, they cause potentially fatal pulmonary embolisms. But the dangers of sitting extend beyond just the risk of clot formation. Georgia had a peculiar habit. She always crossed her right leg over her left when sitting, maintaining this position for hours while reading or knitting. Over time, she noticed her right leg would tingle and feel numb. She dismissed it as just part of getting older. But her doctor explained that this chronic leg crossing was compressing blood vessels and nerves, potentially contributing to circulation problems that could increase stroke risk. Medical research examining the effects of crossed leg sitting has documented several concerning findings. The position creates pressure on the popliteal vein behind the knee, impeding blood return from the lower leg. This compression, maintained over extended periods, can contribute to venous insufficiency, a condition where blood struggles to flow back to the heart efficiently. Studies have also shown that leg crossing can temporarily raise blood pressure, particularly when the elevated leg crosses above knee level. For individuals with existing hypertension or vascular disease, this additional burden matters. Posture while sitting influences more than just our backs. Harold, a devoted reader, would spend hours hunched over his books, head tilted forward, shoulders rounded. He'd occasionally experience headaches and sometimes felt foggy-headed after long reading sessions. What Harold didn't realize was that his chronic forward head posture was subtly compromising blood flow to his brain. The carotid arteries, running through the neck to supply the brain, experience increased stress when the head chronically tilts forward. A recent study published in a neurosurgical journal examined adults with neck pain and found that those who'd experienced posterior circulation strokes had significantly more severe forward head posture compared to matched controls. The researchers hypothesized that chronic postural changes alter blood flow dynamics within the vertebrobasilar system, which supplies the back portion of the brain. When the head tilts forward, the vertebral arteries that run through the cervical spine can become kinked or compressed, reducing flow. Over time, this chronic hypoperfusion can set the stage for stroke. The chair we choose matters more than most people realize. Mildred loved her deep, soft armchair. She'd sink into it each afternoon to watch her favorite shows, sometimes staying there for 3 or 4 hours. What she didn't notice was that the chair was so low and soft that her knees rose higher than her hips, placing sustained pressure on the underside of her thighs. This pressure, maintained for extended periods, compressed the major veins responsible for returning blood from the legs to the heart. Research on seating ergonomics and cardiovascular health has identified several key principles. When sitting, hips should be level with, or slightly higher than, knees to minimize pressure on leg veins. Chairs should provide firm support rather than allowing the body to sink deeply, which creates pressure points. The backrest should support the natural curve of the spine, preventing the forward slumping that compromises both breathing and circulation. Studies have found that elderly individuals using poorly designed seating for extended periods show increased markers of venous insufficiency and report more symptoms of poor circulation. There's also the often overlooked matter of sitting position asymmetry. Louise always tucked her left leg under her right hip when sitting on her sofa. This felt comfortable and natural to her. Over time, she developed chronic pain in her lower back and noticed her left leg would occasionally feel numb. Her physical therapist explained that this asymmetric positioning was tilting her pelvis, creating uneven pressure distribution that could compromise circulation and nerve function on the compressed side. The biomechanics of asymmetric sitting reveal why this matters. The pelvis serves as the foundation for the spine and houses major blood vessels and nerves. When we consistently sit with weight shifted to one side or with one leg tucked under, we rotate and tilt the pelvis. This misalignment creates pressure on neurovascular structures, potentially impeding blood flow and causing nerve irritation. Clinical observations suggest that chronic asymmetric sitting patterns correlate with increased complaints of leg numbness, back pain, and circulatory symptoms in the affected limb. Finally, environmental factors, while sitting, deserve attention. Edward kept his study quite cool, preferring temperatures around 65 degrees. He'd sit at his desk for hours, working on genealogy research, often feeling his fingers and toes grow cold. He'd put on a sweater but thought little more of it. What Edward didn't appreciate was that prolonged exposure to cool temperatures while sitting was causing his peripheral blood vessels to constrict chronically, reducing circulation to his extremities and potentially increasing his overall cardiovascular workload. Thermoregulatory responses to cold environments involve widespread vasoconstriction, the body, attempting to preserve core temperature, reduces blood flow to the skin and extremities. This vasoconstriction raises blood pressure as the same cardiac output must flow through narrowed vessels. For elderly individuals with reduced cardiovascular reserve, or those taking medications affecting circulation, this cold-induced vasoconstriction can create problematic hemodynamic stress. Medical recommendations increasingly emphasize maintaining comfortable ambient temperatures, particularly for older adults, as a simple but effective means of reducing cardiovascular strain. So here we are, having walked through these various daily routines that seem so ordinary, so innocent, yet carry hidden risks that accumulate over time. The question becomes, what do we do with this knowledge? The answer isn't to live in fear or to abandon all comfort and routine. Rather, it's to approach our daily habits with mindfulness and make small adjustments that protect our long-term health. Let me be clear about something important. None of these habits, in isolation, will definitely cause a stroke. The human body is remarkably resilient, and many people engage in these behaviors without consequence. But risk is cumulative, and, as we age, our margin for error narrows. Think of it like tending a garden. You don't need to uproot everything and start over. Instead, you make thoughtful changes, pruning here, watering there, adjusting sun exposure, enriching the soil. Each small intervention contributes to overall health and vitality. The same principle applies to our daily routines. For bathing, the adjustments are straightforward. Consider the time of day, aim for earlier in the evening rather than late at night, giving your body time to stabilize before sleep. Pay attention to water temperature, keeping it warm rather than hot or cold, avoiding extremes that shock the system. Limit duration to 15 to 20 minutes for hot baths. Preventing excessive vasodilation. Always drink a glass of water before bathing. Maintaining adequate blood volume and viscosity. Keep the bathroom comfortably warm, especially in winter, minimizing temperature shocks. And crucially, listen to your body. If you feel dizzy, lightheaded, or experience palpitations while bathing, end the session immediately and rest. For walking, timing and conditions matter. Walk earlier in the day when possible, allowing your body's natural evening relaxation to proceed uninterrupted. Maintain upright posture, shoulders back, head level, arms swinging naturally at your sides. This maximizes breathing efficiency and cerebral blood flow. Wait at least 45 minutes after meals before walking, allowing digestion to progress without competing with exercise for blood flow. Be mindful of weather. In extreme heat, walk early morning or evening and hydrate generously. In cold, dress warmly and consider indoor alternatives when temperatures drop below 60 degrees. Choose level terrain when possible, reserving hills and stairs for when you're well rested and have gradually built up tolerance. And always hydrate before and after walking. Maintaining blood fluidity. For sitting, the key is regular movement. Set a timer if necessary, reminding yourself to stand and move every 30 minutes to an hour. Even 2 minutes of movement helps. Keep both feet flat on the floor when sitting, avoiding leg crossing or asymmetric positions that compress vessels. Sit tall with back support, preventing the forward slumping that compromises breathing and circulation. Choose chairs with proper height and firmness, ensuring hips are level with or slightly above knees. Stay warm while sitting, maintaining comfortable room temperature to avoid chronic vasoconstriction. And whenever possible, replace some sitting time with light activity, walking around the house, doing household tasks, or simple standing breaks. These adjustments aren't burdensome. They don't require special equipment or dramatic lifestyle changes. What they require is awareness and consistency. The beautiful thing about prevention is that it's built on small, sustainable changes maintained over time. I want to share something that took me years of medical practice to fully appreciate. Your body is constantly communicating with you. Those little signals, the slight dizziness, the tingling in your leg, the persistent headache, the unusual fatigue. These aren't just annoyances to push through. They're your body's way of saying something needs attention. Learning to listen, really listen, might be the most important skill you develop for maintaining your health. Think about Margaret and Thomas and all the others whose stories I've shared. What they had in common wasn't bad luck or genetic doom. It was simply not knowing that everyday routines could carry hidden risks. But now you know. And knowledge, paired with action, is protective. I encourage you to take inventory of your own routines. Walk through your day in your mind. How do you bathe? When do you walk? How do you sit? Where might you be unknowingly creating risk? Then, starting tomorrow, choose one thing to adjust. Just one. Maybe it's drinking water before your shower, or setting a timer to remind you to stand every hour, or moving your walk from evening to morning. Make that one change automatic, and then add another. Small changes, sustained over time, accumulate into profound protection. And please, share this knowledge with the people you love. Your spouse, your siblings, your friends. They're navigating these same daily routines, likely with the same lack of awareness you may have had before reading this. Stroke doesn't just affect the person who experiences it, it ripples through families and communities. Prevention is both a personal responsibility and a gift we give to everyone who cares about us. Remember, you're not powerless in the face of stroke risk. Yes, some factors lie beyond our control age. genetics, past medical history. But how we move through our days remains firmly within our grasp. Each time you pause to drink water, adjust your posture, or stand up to stretch, you're actively protecting your brain. These small acts of self-care compound over time, building a foundation of health that can sustain you through the decades ahead. Your life is built from these ordinary moments: the morning shower, the afternoon walk, the evening spent in your favorite chair. These moments deserve your attention and care. Approach them with mindfulness. Make adjustments where needed, and trust that these small changes are working in your favor. Your future self, moving through days with strength and clarity, will thank you for the care you take today. The story you're writing with your daily habits doesn't have to include stroke. You have the power to edit that narrative, one routine adjustment at a time. Start now. Start today. Your brain, your health, and everyone who loves you deserve nothing less.